Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Mastering Navigation, Dialog, and Pop-Up Controls in App Builder. Of course, we'll be covering a little bit more, but after today's webinar, you should have a pretty good idea on how to use these components and controls, something we usually don't talk about in our webinars. We're always focused on grids or other UI components. Plus, you'll get a little sneak peek of some new stuff coming. So again, my name is Jason Barris. I'm a Senior VP of Developer Tools here at Infragistics, and with me today, of course, is George Abraham, our Senior Product Owner, Senior UX Architect. Please use our emails if you have any questions or want to follow up with anything after the webinar. So today, do a quick overview of what you get in the toolbox with App Builder. I'm going to pass it over to George for a demo, and then we will wrap it up. We have a poll today. And a real quick wrap up. So please stick around till the end to do the poll. The poll is important and it really does help us drive features in the product. Housekeeping, ask Q&A or ask questions in the Q&A or chat. We have the A team on standby. Of course, Ravco, Pablo, Brian, and everyone else on the product team is ready to answer your questions. So use the chat window and just make sure that you're posting to public so then everyone can see your questions and the answers. And of course, the recording and the slide deck will be sent tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started here. So App Builder has around 50 UI components in the toolbox. There's probably another maybe 10 or 15 that we don't have yet that are in the Ignite UI product. So maybe some of the more advanced ones like the query editor isn't in there yet. Of course, the hierarchical grid isn't in there yet. The pivot grid is in, but we still are working on that configuration dialog for the pivot grid. So there's things that aren't in there, but for about 95%, maybe even 99% of what you need to build an application, the UI components are in there with all the properties that you need to set to enable building a great experience. Of course, the nice thing is no matter what you're using, all of the theming works perfectly, so you can create your custom themes, use our built-in themes, and all of these components play into it based on the design system. Today, we're going to focus on a little bit of the menu and navigation, and then some of these notification components. Like I mentioned, we don't usually cover these in the demos. They're used in our built-in samples. So if you look at something like the task manager sample, the project management sample, the training sample, the manufacturing sample, they're all using these dialogues in one way or another. So you can learn through those samples, but today you are going to get a nice deep dive from George on how to use these. So with that, I'm done with the slides. I usually talk a little bit more about the controls, but you see that every couple weeks in our webinar. So today we'll get right to the demo, and then George will pass it back to me and we'll wrap it up. So George, take it away.
Hello, let's get started. If you're building a web application or applications of any kind, there would of course be situations where you would like to show portions of the UI or functionality on demand, right? Where you're not always showing it to the user, but the user is asking for it or it's being triggered based on something the application is doing. In order to do that, App Builder actually has 4 such components, which I'll be reviewing today, which will help you handle these kind of situations. One of those components, which we'll cover today, is the most common one, which is the dialog. And I'll be showing you the different kind of dialogues available in App Builder. For example, this is an example of an alert dialog, which is a very basic dialog where you are actually providing some content. There's no title, it's just a messaging you want to give to the user, and the user would acknowledge it to dismiss it. Then we have another flavor of it called the confirmation dialog, which basically shows a more prominent title for the dialog. And then we have a custom dialog, and the custom dialog is something which you have full control over, where you could change how the title looks, how the body of the dialog looks, and even what's shown in the actions area. In addition to these dialogues, we also have some other components which are usually in the notification category. So one such component is a snack bar, and the peculiarity of the snack bar is that it actually shows up in a specific location and it has this capability to dismiss itself, right, after a time duration goes by. And then we have a component called banner. Banner components are great for inline style notifications. So what that means is that it occupies space on the UI. So in this case, if I open the banner which is inside, the banner is actually shown, and this could be triggered for various different conditions. So based on an interaction, based on some kind of a rule you might have specified. But at this point, once the banner is shown, I can dismiss it. This particular banner is inside this particular bounding box, which is the gray area you're seeing here. And then I can also show the banner holistically, right, outside all the app UI, which is like here. I showed it on the bottom, and you can also show it on the top. Doesn't matter. And the final kind is another common pattern, which is a drop-down pattern. And that's great for either using as a selection menu or as a navigation menu. So if you have a more options button, you click on it, it shows you the list of options, and you can click on it to make some change happen on the UI, or you can click on it to trigger a navigation of some kind. So in this particular session, I'll be showing you how to set up, add these kind of components to your design, configure them, add interactivity so that you know when or how you can trigger them, and then finally, how to find these kind of components in your application, because these are components which are transient. So it's not always visible in the UI. So I'll show you how you can actually access these components in the App Builder UI. So with that, let's just start with the dialog. And for that, I'm going to switch over to the editor here. And this is the very same design I was showing you earlier. In order to add a component like the dialog, it works like any other component from the toolbox, right? When I say toolbox, these are all the components we have in the toolbox today. And if I want to add a component, I can either search for it and drag it in, or I can use my quick add capability, which is like the Command E or Control E, and I can search for dialog. And that would basically add a dialog. And immediately you should see that it's actually shown as an overlay. That means it's not occupying or fighting for space with other elements in the UI. It's actually a layer right on top. And once the dialog is selected, if you look on the right side on the properties area, we have some presets for the dialogs. And these presets are what I was showing you earlier, is that we have this type of dialog, which is the confirmation, alert, and custom content. The confirmation dialog is what you're seeing right now. Now, the peculiarity about the confirmation dialog is that it's a preset. What that means is that a lot of things are basically added in for you, and you're not customizing anything other than the actual content. So for example, if I want to change my title, I can say new confirmation title, and as you can see, it's updated in that dialog. I can zoom in for you. Same thing for the message. What message do you want to show to your user? And then you can change the label for the action buttons which have been added. In addition to the action buttons, you also have the option whether to allow users to close this dialog when they click outside, or whether the escape key would work for dismissing the dialog. And that would depend on your application scenario. In addition to these presets, there are some interactions which are also added out of the box. What that means is that on click cancel, it shows that it needs to open or close the dialog window, basically working like a toggle. And if you on click OK, it's doing the same thing, open or close the dialog window. Now, the reason for this is that you can actually change what it's supposed to do. So for example, if I want to click OK, I don't want to close the window, I want to basically navigate or trigger some other change, I can change what action it can be applied to this particular interaction. So in this case, I can navigate to a different view in the application. I can use show or hide to display something which is hidden on the UI. You want to reveal it. And then we have something called component action. These are basically methods on any other component on the UI which you would like to trigger. Now, what you should notice that if I switch to a simplified dialog called the alert, you can see that it basically takes away the title. Everything else pretty much stays the same. I can bring that back with the confirmation, and I can make the confirmation dialog look like the other ones by turning off the title, right? So it's as simple as that. And if I want full control over what's shown in this particular dialog, I can basically go in and create my custom dialog. Now, the moment I set it to custom, you get pretty much all the capabilities of the previous dialog. The only difference is that now I have a section here called body 1, which I can remove, and then I can drag and drop anything I need inside this dialog. Because the other two dialogs were just presets, what that means is the size of the dialog is already predetermined. But if I'm doing a custom dialog, I can of course add my own layout into this. So I can say Command E, give me a column layout. And in this column layout, I can say, give it a size. And you will see that the dialog respects the content. So if the content is wider, the dialog would actually grow in order to show what that content is. I wanted to show you what more customizations could be done for the custom dialog, and I already have such a dialog designed. But how do you actually find these dialogs? Because as I said, these dialogs are components which are just hiding away in this UI. It's not always visible. And for that reason, if you look on the view level itself, you would see there's a breadcrumb here saying dialogs and this drop down, which is the name of this particular view. And then I have a breadcrumb here called overlays. And that's what we are referring to, that layer which sits on top of your view. It's called overlays for us. And if I open up the overlays drop down, it's going to show you all the components which actually live in that overlay area, right? So for example, I just added some dialogues. Then I said I have a custom dialog already designed. But you can see there are other components here, which I'll talk about soon, the snack bar, the alert and the confirm. So if I just hover over it, it's going to show me exactly what those dialogues look like, even without me having to decide upfront. So this is one of the custom dialogues I already have designed. And this was the custom dialog I was kind of mucking around with earlier. So let me go back to this particular custom dialog. In order for me to edit it, I can just select this particular dialog from here. In addition to finding these dialogs from this breadcrumb area, you can of course come into the outline and search for a dialog component, because every time you add a dialog, it's pretty much added to the DOM, at least for the design time experience. And if I try to search for the outline, you will see that there's these search tags, which are also available to me, which I can use to drill down those overlays. So if I click on overlay, it's going to show me every component which actually participates in that overlay layer. Now let's talk in more detail with this custom dialog. So in this particular custom dialog, just like the previous one, I added a column layout. And inside the column layout, I added images, I added some text, I added email and password as fields. But I can do completely custom work on this particular dialog. What that means is that even though this has a title and an actions area, the actions area is where these buttons live. If I want to create my custom actions area, which means that I say that I have 3 buttons in my actions area, 1 button which is left aligned, and then I have 2 buttons which are right aligned. At this point, I would say that I would use my own custom actions area. And I also say that I want to create a title area with a close button, and I want to design that particular experience. I can do the same thing. So in the interest of time, I've already pre-created these components. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the visibility on for those particular components, right? So for that, the same thing. I have this hidden search tag. I click on that, and you can see there are 2 sections here called custom header and custom actions. If I enable custom actions, you see this actions area pop up here, which has that layout I was referring to, where I have this options button here, and I have a cancel and the save button here. And I'm also going to toggle on the custom header. As you can see, it's just another layout component. I added some text in here, and I added an icon button, and I just positioned it so that it shows up on the right side. Now at this point, you must be asking, okay, what should I do with the header and the actions area here? Well, not a problem. If I look at the dialog properties here, you can see that the title and the actions area, which are part of the component, they can be toggled off, right? So I can just say, turn that off, turn the actions area off. And now I have my own custom dialog where even the title is custom, the body of the dialog is custom, and the actions area is also custom. Now, in order for me to trigger these dialogs, I actually need to add some interactions, right? So for that, I need to find an element which is part of my design, which is persistently visible to the user, and be able to trigger this dialog in some particular way. So for that, let me go back to my design. And here you can see that the open alert dialog, I have an action added on click, open or close alert. So let's do that from scratch. I'm just going to remove this. I have no interactions defined, but now I want this button click to actually open the alert dialog. So for that, I will just add the interaction on click, and all the components which live on the overlay, they are actually triggered like an open and close. It's like a toggle action. So I can come in here and click on open or close. And at this point, it says pick a component. And we automatically do the same thing we were doing everywhere else, like filtering out and finding components which live in the overlay. We are going to list it for you right here, right? So in this case, I want my alert. I just pointed to that. And now this thing is hooked up. The same thing has happened for the custom dialog. I basically have an open or close, and I have picked custom dialog from the list of overlay components. Now with this in mind, let me show you how that whole application works already. I say open alert dialog, OK and close, open confirmation dialog. I can say open or close. And as I mentioned before, these dialogs, the basic dialogs, the buttons are pre-wired. But what about this custom dialog? Because in this custom dialog, I would like to, because they didn't come with buttons initially, I want to actually make that dialog close the same operation. As I said before, if you want to find the dialog, you can search for it here, or I can just go into this thing and it's a custom dialog. And I'm going to select that button which I added custom. And here I did the exact same thing. I basically added an on-click interaction, and I said on click, trigger this action open or close. And what should it actually open or close? I just pointed to the custom content dialog, right? Now with this approach will allow you to set up the dialog by adding it to the design surface. You know where it lives, which is always available through the overlay, or you can search for it in the outline. You can create the preset dialogs, which already come with some actions built in, or you can create a custom dialog where you can actually add your own header, body, and the actions area, or I can hide them away and use the built-in one. Oops, not the layout. I can use the built-in one, which is this customs actions area. I don't want them. I'm going to use the ones which are provided by the dialog itself, called title and actions. And then I already have my dialog back with only the body section, which is custom. Now that you've seen how the dialog works, the other two components which I was talking about, one is, let's start with the banner. Banner is different from dialogs only because they actually participate in the layout of the page. What that means is that it needs to make room for itself. For that reason, whenever you add a banner to your design, it basically works like any other element. You're adding like a button or something else, and you just have to give it some positioning to say, where do you want this banner to show? So in this case, the banner, I wanted to show it inside this particular box, which is what was triggered here. So it's saying this is important, and this was triggered outside. The way it's set up on the design surface is that if I add, let's just get out of this dialog here. I'm just going to click select parent element. So in order to show you how a banner works and how it's slightly different from the dialog component, what I'm going to do is in here, I'm going to add an element which would trigger the banner, right? So I would come in here, I can just add a button. And now I'll select the whole view. I do the same Control E, which is my quick add action, and I say banner. And you see this adds the banner to the outside of the design. And now when I click away from it, the banner disappears, right? And this is something which is might look strange initially, but the banner is not something which is always present. It is also kind of like the overlay, but the only difference is that it takes part in the UI. So in order for me to get the banner again, I can of course find it in the outline, select it. This is the banner I was just doing. I can add the same properties in here. I can say webinar demo for the message. I can select the icon. I can change it to a different icon. I can give it a size. I can give it a color. And there is this button in here which I would like it to dismiss this banner, because banner, once it's made visible, banner has this capability to you don't want to show it anymore. So I would come in here, I'll just rename this to dismiss. And then it's the same open close kind of an interaction. So I would say on click, open or close, pick a component, and in this case, I'll just pick banner, and that's it. Now I have an interaction set to close this particular banner. I can rename this as banner demo. And if I look at the interaction here, you see this has also been renamed to banner demo. So the renaming those components will make it easier for you to find them in your UI. So with that banner, I can also move this banner. So I can just say copy. I can just cut it out of here. And it's the same button. I can go inside that layout. I paste it. Now the banner is part of this particular layout. Everything works the same way. So for this particular button, I would go the same way. I would say run open or close. And I would say banner demo. And if I run it, you'll see now the banner appears inside this particular layout. And the other thing you should notice about the banner is that there are some animations which make it nice and pleasant when the banner actually appears, right? So if I click on banner inside, you see it animates, makes room for itself. It pushes down everything else on the UI. And this is a great scenario for an inline banner. Another place I use the banner inline is on my custom dialog, which I didn't show you earlier. But there is a banner component which was added inside this particular layout. And for now, just for the purposes of the demo, I triggered it to show when you hit the save button. So if I hit save, you can see that the dialog actually just grows gracefully and it shows you some kind of a validation message. And this is something which you can hook into even after you generate the application, is that you have the component created. And if you have some more complex logic, which you have actually need in your application, you can hook that up in order to show and hide this particular banner. So for now, I've just added the dismiss kind of an operation. But here is an example of a banner added to this custom dialog. And I can show you where that is. If I go back into my editor here, and I have my custom content dialog, which is what you were seeing earlier. If I open up the DOM in here, you can see that it is composed of this close and save buttons. It's got a custom header, which I have hidden. And they have my column layout. Let's call it custom. I'm just going to rename it as custom content for the dialog. Oh, let's just call it custom. That's enough. And then I have this banner inline. As you can see, when I select it, it is visible to me. But if I select something else, the banner is gone, because that's how the application is actually supposed to work, is the banner is not supposed to be visible all the time. That's the purpose of the banner. Now, similar to the banner, we have the third kind of component I want to talk about, which was a snack bar. And the snack bar, again, is slightly different, is that the snack bar is got a predetermined location. And the only difference between the banner and the snack bar is the snack bar does not fight for space. It just shows up in the overlay itself. And of course, I can look at my overlay to see if I have some snack bars. Of course, I do. But let's add a new one for the demo here. I just do Command E. I say snack bar. And the snack bar is now showing up in its predetermined location. And I can basically say this snack bar has some properties for changing the messaging. Again, I'm going to say webinar demo. And it has the ability built in to automatically hide after a set duration, right? And this can be very handy if you're just showing it something like a toast notification. And maybe you actually don't need any action. You just want to show them a message saying, hey, this was successfully done, and move on to the next thing. Here it's saying that in 4 seconds, make it disappear. And in order for me to trigger this one, let's go back to this button, which is I added in the demo zone here. So I go to my button. And in this case, it was hooked to the previous demo I showed you, which was the banner. But I can now change it to a snack bar, right? So now I have 2 snack bars in this UI. So let's just call this particular snack bar webinar. And then I go to the button. It'll make it easier for me to find this particular component, snack bar webinar. And now if I run this application, click on it, webinar demo, which shows up on the bottom, wait for 4 seconds, and it will disappear. So that gives you a sense of the differences between a dialog, which is always an overlay. It shows up on top. I can set up the actions custom or use the built-in one. Then I have something which I showed you was the banner, which is an inline component, which is used for showing messages inside a specific layout, and it makes room for itself when it actually shows up. And then I have snack bar, where I really don't need users to take any action, but I want to show you some information and I want it to disappear. So it says read quickly, I'll disappear in 4 seconds, and indeed it does. Now these are different ways you can use it for notification with messaging with action, or you can use it for actually showing a detailed form based on your interaction. And then I have the banner, which is good for showing persistent messaging, which the user actually has to dismiss himself or herself. And then the final component I wanted to show you was the simple drop-down component. And this is an example where I'm showing you more options. I click on it. Now it's going to show me a list of options, and I can use these options to either make a selection or I can use it to navigate to something. And this is also very handy, and it's an overlay kind of a component. However, the only difference is the drop downs have a single owner here. It's attached to this more options button. So let's do that. So I go into this button area here and I'm going to reuse it. So I'm going to remove this interaction. And when you try to add a drop down, you can drag and drop, or I'm going to do the same thing. I say drop down. At this point, it's going to say select a drop down trigger, because that's what it needs in order to be triggered. Otherwise, the drop downs have no purpose in your design. So if I select that particular button, you can see that the drop down pretty much gets attached to that component. And when I select it, I get the option to create more items for my drop down. I can bind it to data and repeat these options in here. Or what I can do is that I can change or retarget this drop down to point to something else. So if I go up one level, you will see that the drop down itself has these couple of options for itself. One is whether it's the type menu, which is the navigation style, or of the type select. You won't notice much change on the design surface, but essentially the select will show which option was selected. Whereas the menu, it doesn't need that. It's just going to, when you click on it, it's just going to trigger a workflow and close the drop down itself. But if I want to retarget this particular drop down to something else, you can see there's an option called trigger. I can click on that trigger and I can find another valid component. Right now, you can see the not allowed symbol showing up on your cursor. That's because we have made sure that you cannot attach drop downs to a layout. It has to be to some specific component or an icon button or a button. And I cannot select another button because this button already has an interaction on it. However, if I create another button in here, say button, and let me just color this button differently so that, oops, wrong one. Let me color the background here. Just move it up so you can see it. And now if I select that particular button which has the drop down, because the drop down is attached to it, it automatically shows itself. And then if I select the drop down level properties here, I can retarget and I can select a different button here. And now you can see that button is, that drop down is now attached to that particular button. So let's just do a quick recap. I talked about the alert dialog, which is a very simplified dialog. All you kind of adjust is the messaging and where the buttons should actually go to. I talked about the confirmation dialog, which is just a variation of the alert dialog. The more interesting dialog for a lot of purposes might be the custom dialog, where you can fully customize what you want to show as the header, what you want to show in the body of the dialog, and what you want to show in the actions area. And then we talked about the components like banner, which is great for inline notifications. I can show it inside the layout, or I can show it outside the whole app as a whole. Snack bar components, which are also an overlay component, but they have this property to auto dismiss based on a time, and it's showing very minimal quick information to the user. We talked about the drop down, right, which is just attached to a trigger here. And then I showed you how if a drop down was attached to a specific trigger, I would like to reparent it to something else. But here's something interesting happened, right? So if I click on this button, you see that it's triggering the same drop down. That's because it's still, you can use that to trigger as long as the on-click event is available on any element, you can trigger drop-downs on a different element, right? So if you don't want that, you can just remove that action and then it will no longer trigger. So this button becomes a dummy button, and this is the only button which actually triggers the drop-down. And finally, once you have a design with all these kind of components in here, as a refresher, you can actually find these kind of components which live on almost a layer by itself in this breadcrumb here called overlays. And I can just hover over the options here to see where and what these components are. I can do it from the design surface, or I can do it from the outline. If I search on the outline, you would see some search tags which allow me to quickly find these kind of components. So there are hidden components and there are overlay components. Click on overlay. It shows me a list of all the components available. I hope this is helpful in order for you to create and actually use components like dialogues and snack bar, and you also know what the differences are on when to use which one. All right, that's all for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, George. That was a great demo full of features that everyone needs to know. I really appreciate that. And of course, some of those nice new features as well. So please, the poll popped up. Please answer the handful of questions in the poll. Like every week when I mention, or every webinar when I mention the poll, this is what drives features in the product, and it helps us understand how you're using the product. So the poll is very important. The next webinar, I will share more of these poll results because we collect them over time. I didn't have time to get all of the information from marketing that they collect and put it in the slides today. But the next webinar, we will have a little bit more details in the polls, which will be interesting for you. So your action item after you get done with the poll is, if you haven't tried App Builder, get it today. We have a ton of great features. We've been showing this master detail feature now for a while. This is shipping imminently. Our React grid should be shipping next week as well in Ignite UI. It won't be an App Builder quite yet, but the React grid is something that you have been asking for a very long time. The updated React grid. Of course, we still have a React grid in the product, but this is the React grid that's based off of our web component, our new strategy to have the same API and the same capabilities across Angular, Web Components, Blazor, and React. So getting this React grid in the market is important, and you'll be able to get that next week. And of course, Blazor is super popular and super important to us. We are continuing to improve the Blazor story. We have more features coming in Blazor in about, I would say, 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, with our Q4 release of Infragistics Ultimate, which of course includes App Builder and all of the UI components. But the key thing here, using App Builder will absolutely cut out 80% of your dev time. It removes all of that mundane, boring, error-prone code that nobody likes to write. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us today in the webinar. We're going to stay online and answer the rest of the questions to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. I want to thank George for his great demo. Keep an eye out on your email tomorrow for the recording of this webinar to share with your colleagues. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be back doing another webinar wholly focused on the new data binding and master detail features in App Builder that we are shipping in the next week or two. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate it. Thank you again, George, and everyone online. And we will see you at the next webinar.